So this session is going to be recorded. Um, and I'm going to stop recording after McKenna's training and then before the Q&A. So any of your questions will not be recorded at the end once we start having discussion. And so what I ask that everyone, if you could put your Food Hub name and location in the chat, and then rename yourself, or I invite you to rename yourself to include your Food Hub name or organization. And you can do that by clicking the three dots on your square in the Zoom and click rename. And then we can see everybody is here today. So the training is from 12 to 1:30. And I'm going to do a quick intro and then pass it off to McKenna to lead us in the vendor onboarding training. I'll also be asking you to complete an evaluation of the training so we can track our impact. We are funded by the Southwest Regional Food Business Center, and that supports resilient, diverse, and competitive local and regional food systems by improving opportunities for food and farm businesses across Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah. Unfortunately, this program was terminated, but we were able to carry out these Food Hub regulatory compliance trainings with their support. And yeah, if you could go to the next slide, McKenna, thank you. And so the California Food Hub Network is part of the University of California Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, or UC SAREP. And we support work across the food supply chain that supports agriculture and food systems that are economically viable, conserve natural resources and biodiversity, and enhance the quality of life and equity in the state's urban, rural, and tribal communities. Next slide. The California Food Hub Network is a learning network to coordinate technical assistance, collaborative learning, and information sharing for and among food hubs in California. You can view a map of food hubs across California on our website, and I'll share a link later so you can add your food hub if it is not there. Next slide. I think many of you are also part of our California Food Hub Network listserv. This is used to share upcoming events, funding opportunities, and the exchange of best practices between food hub operators. The listserv is made up of California food hub operators and organizations that support food hubs with technical assistance and market access. And I will share a link later too if you'd like to join that. And lastly, I wanted to highlight UC SAREP's Food Hub food safety resources. We've built out a suite of resources, including sample food safety plans, SOPs, and a guide to food safety certification for food hubs and food facilities. Okay, so I'm gonna get us started by introducing McKenna. So McKenna is going to run through the vendor onboarding training and we'll conclude with a Q&A. The Q&A, again, will not be recorded. And then I welcome you to put your questions in the chat as they come up. I also welcome you to come on camera if you're comfortable with that. No pressure. I know that as a speaker, it's nice to see some visual feedback. And just to introduce McKenna. So McKenna Hayes is the Director of Strategic Impact and Compliance for Food Connect's Food Hub in Vermont. She has worked as a food hub operator for over 10 years and in various sections of the food retail and sustainable food and farming industry for over 15 years. McKenna holds a master's degree from Vermont Law School in Food and Agriculture, Law and Policy, and has a knack for translating regulatory language into food hub speak. Thank you, McKenna. Pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to see you all. Happy to have you join us for another riveting regulatory compliance training. Yeah, so like Alicia said, I've been working in food hubs for a long time as a food hub operator and then food systems for a long time. And over the course of that journey, just have really delved deep into the regulatory compliance world of food hubs and food hub operators. And it's a very gray world and it doesn't really fit that cleanly into lots of regulations. So that's where the knack for translating has come in handy of just, reading and digesting these really complicated regulations. And then as a food hub operator, thinking about how to implement and enact some of these things in the realistic, scrappy world of food hubbing. Um, been doing technical assistance to food hubs for a really long time. And then really, I mean, informally for quite a long time, and then formally over the last 2 years, Food Connects launched. We now do a TA program focused on regulatory compliance for food hubs, and that's the program that I direct now. So that's part of what brought us all together today. I think I'll leave that at that, and then, um, so what I am not. I'm not a lawyer. Some of you have heard this spiel before, but I have to do it. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an agency employee. I'm not an inspector and auditor. So legally, I do need to say, right, like this is not technical legal advice. I am sharing my um, recommendations, observations, lessons learned, and a lot of the work that I've done on regulatory compliance with and for food hubs over the last, 10 plus years. Um, so I just gotta check that box at the beginning of each of these trainings. And yeah, then we can move on. And we will right now. So we're talking today about vendor onboarding, AKA your supply chain program. So I'm going to use those terms interchangeably throughout the course of this training. And some of the goals of what we're going to go through today is your intro to vendor onboarding, why you need it, what it is, the different threads that inform your overall supply chain / vendor onboarding program. And then I'm going to show you um, some systems to support it. It's a lot of information, a lot of records, and I'm going to show you specifically how Food Connects has set that up to support our vendor onboarding program. I encourage you to drop questions in as we go. I do like if it's applicable to the moment, I do like to answer questions in real time. We won't go too deep into any wormholes, and I will pull us out of them, even though I do love a good regulatory wormhole. And then at the end, hoping to save around 15 minutes for questions, and we'll see how much we have left at the end. Yeah, that's what we're working with. So I want to start with some shared language. So there's a lot of there's a lot of words on this slide, but basically you're going to hear me say a lot of these words today. So I want to make sure we just touch in on what these things mean in the way I use them in this training. So compliance program. When I talk about compliance program, it's your overarching program that holds lots of different threads. So it can include your food safety. It does include your supply chain program, which is the thread we're looking at today. Your OSHA is part of that. Your DOT, which is your fleet and transport, your licensing, your staff training. There's lots of different parts that together create your overall compliance program. Today, we are narrowing in on your vendor onboarding and your supply chain program. Vendor. So at Food Connects, and the way I use vendor is we use the term vendor for any person or for any company, food producer, etc., that is selling through food through our food hub. So Food Connects is a wholesale aggregation, I should have said this in the beginning, is a wholesale aggregation distribution food hub. So we are aggregating and distributing food. We do not touch products, so I use the term vendor for anybody's food that we are selling. It is also applicable if you are a food hub that is doing processing or manufacturing. That language would apply to any ingredients you are sourcing, any inputs into that final product that you are making. So vendor, and then in general, the way we internally talk about things at Food Connects, and if you don't have shared language about this within your operation, I encourage you to work on that with your team. All of our vendors are where the product is coming from, and then all of our customers are the ones who receive the product. So having shared language around what party is what especially internally, we'll use some different language externally, but in terms of system development and defining things, try to like really dial that in with what language you're using as you develop these systems. Vendor onboarding, aka your supply chain program. We're going to get into a lot more weeds of this, but it's a system a potential vendor goes through before and during the approval to sell their product or provide ingredients to your food hub. Um, we're going to narrow in very specifically on the compliance part of this, but it is actually that the chain of your onboarding can be quite long, even starting from when that vendor first reaches out and you're vetting them to see if it's a fit for your organization to sell or work with in terms of like pricing, tasting the product, logistics, things like that. So there are earlier steps in the vendor onboarding system. We're kind of zeroing in on, okay, we've decided we want to onboard this vendor. Now what do we do? So that's where we're starting the conversation along the thread of vendor onboarding. FSMA, we had a very technical training about FSMA a couple weeks ago. So FSMA is the Food Safety Modernization Act, and it's one of the primary regulations that informs compliance in the food system, especially for food hubs. And it is regulated through the FDA and a third-party audit. So a third-party audit is not a legal requirement. It is a voluntary audit. It's often required to sell to larger institutions or larger customers, and it is applicable in today's conversations because a third-party audit can sometimes increase or impact what your supply chain program needs to include. And we'll talk about why. Okay. So And actually, so a lot of the pictures you're going to see today in this training are from our vendors. So there's some really cool photos of all the different vendors we work with. Food Connects works with, I mean, the number ebbs and flows, but I think we're at about 120 active vendors right now. Lots of really amazing, amazing businesses and people. So when we talk about vendor onboarding or your supply chain program, and you really boil it down, the basic question we're looking at is what documentation does your food hub need to collect and verify from a vendor before you sell their product, before you use that input into a processing step, and how often does it need to be updated? Okay, and it's, spoiler alert, just like every answer for any question we do a general food hub, it is different depending on your specific food hub, what actions you take, what size you are. We'll look at those variables. So the goal today is, I'm not going to be able to answer every single question about all the regulatory threads that tie into your supply chain program, and I'm not going to be able to answer every single question for your food hub. But my goal is to leave you with some baseline recommendations and tools, and there'll be a lot of templates that you'll get after the fact of this training. Alicia will send out a bunch of stuff afterwards, including quite a few different templates that we're going to look at today. Okay, so if you've done trainings with me, you know that we always start by reorienting to some of these common definitions of what a food hub is. So take a few moments and just read through these two definitions. These are just the most common ones I see floating around and the ones that I usually point to. Take a drink of water while you read. And I like to do this in the beginning of our trainings just to remind us all how different food hubs are from each other. An entity can engage in any of the activities listed here in any combination in varying scales with different market channels, multiple states, varying business structures, insert other variable here and still be called a food hub. So that's part of what makes food hubs so awesomely unique to your to your community. And then also it makes it really ambiguous and uh, difficult, interesting treasure map quest to figure out where you fall in some of the regulatory frameworks and understanding what and how different things apply to your operation. And that wisdom applies to your supply chain program. So Yeah, you've seen this slide before. If you've done trainings with me, these are some of the main variables that weave into your regulatory framework. So your business structure, the activities that your hub engages in, the scale of each activity, often defined in terms of sales numbers, your market channel. Are you doing direct to consumer? Are you doing wholesale? Are you doing charitable giving? Different things apply. Um, your supply chain. So that's again really what we're talking about today. Who are you selling product from? What is your product mix? So are you doing raw agricultural commodities? Are you doing temperature control for safety foods? Service area, do you cross state lines? Um, and then if we go from there, when we dig in, okay, so here we are, right? We just looked at some of these variables of overarching compliance program threads. And now we're going to take that a step narrower and start to look at your supply chain considerations. So, not everything that fits into your supply chain is directly related to a regulation. So, right, so our training we did last time was about FSMA. It was very specific to FSMA as a regulation, and it was quite technical. Your supply chain is very heavily informed by your FSMA status, yes, but there's also a lot of other things at play as you start to think about what does my supply chain need to include. I like to think of different parts of the compliance program as like a basket, and there's these different threads that we need to consider and pull together to weave like what this program needs to include and how we're going to do it. So the things that I see most often feeding into your supply chain program is your liability requirements. So that's typically your insurance and what you need to require for vendors, what kind of insurance they need to have. Whether or not you are selling certified organic product or using certified organic ingredients and processing an organic certified product, if you have any specs from customer contracts, if you have any specs from third-party audits, and then, of course, your FSMA status. So that is a pretty big player in your supply chain verification. Specifically, Subpart G of FSMA, which outlines your supply chain verification requirements. We talked a lot about FSMA exemptions last training. And if you didn't catch that training on FSMA, it's recorded. We'll probably, send those links out a couple of times. And then, like we're not going to be able to like go into the FSMA wormhole today. But the subpart G part of FSMA, the supply chain verification requirement, is one of the very specific sections of FSMA that is impacted by whether or not by your FSMA status. So some FSMA statuses are exempt or partially exempt from subpart G. And we're going to talk high level about what that means in a couple slides from now. Um, but it essentially informs what type of food safety requirements and verification steps you're responsible for, and how that trickles down to the vendors that you're working with. Okay. So Food Connects we're third party audit certified. We have a very strict high level third party certification as part of as part of our vendor onboarding with a larger customer. And so as a food hub, you'll often receive, so what we're doing with our vendors, depending on what customers you work with, you will receive the same type of list sometimes from a customer that you are onboarding with. You as a hub are a vendor onboarding with a customer. And when we had to do our third party audit, our auditor dug into our supply chain records. I don't know, I didn't know what I was expecting during the audit, but I wasn't necessarily expecting that to be like where she went in, like with a scalpel into the records. And it was really interesting. And she explained to me how because we often are working with smaller vendors, I mean, at least at Food Connects, it's part of our mission. We help small and medium scale vendors access wholesale markets, right? And to her perspective, she talked to me about how that does potentially introduce a higher level of risk into the supply chain because sometimes there are gaps in the regulatory framework for smaller growers, smaller food producers, and even smaller food hubs, which is why we're all here, so we can start working on some of those areas of our programming. So luckily for us, we had a lot of good stuff in place, and but it was one place where, yeah, she really spot checked our records. And it was really interesting talking to her about her perspective on the importance of the supply chain program within introducing risk into your supply chain. And I think for better or worse, I think mostly better, a lot of customers assume that food hubs often have a very like robust supply chain program in place. And I have found it's an area we do a lot of work in, and so I'm happy to be doing training on this and help spread some of the lessons that Food Connects has learned over the years as we developed our supply chain program. So, okay, we'll keep moving on here. So the way I'm going to do this training today is we had a question in the chat if we had third-party food safety certifications from all our suppliers slash vendors. We do not. And I'm going to talk about that in another slide. We don't require third party. We like it if you have a third party audit. It's one box to check. If you don't have one, though, we have it built out. So there's other things that you can provide because not everyone's going to have a third party audit. It's a huge barrier to the supply chain if you're requiring that. Some customers do require that, though. And we'll talk more about that. And if we don't get into enough detail, we'll come back to that question because this is a really good question that comes up a lot. Um, so the way I'm going to go through this training, because there's so many different things at play, I am going to go through the Food Connects onboarding program, each step of our onboarding program and what's part of that, and then talk a little bit about what and like why and how it's part of our program, and then how it kind of relates to the overall weaving of the consideration as you're building out your onboarding program or maybe updating your program. Um, so these are 7 parts of, I do those numbers? Yeah. So we have 7 parts of our onboarding program. So we have a new vendor Google form. We have insurance. We require W-9. If applicable, your organic certification and product list. And then if applicable, proof of other regulated third-party claims. And each of these has a slide, so we'll go into more detail. Vendor attestations, and then your food safety documentation and verification. And that varies by vendor category. Um, I can't remember if I said this already, but in case I didn't, I'm also going to show you how our backend systems of how we have all this information set up so you can see some of that too. Okay, so first, we have a general intake form. It is very basic Google form. I will say all of our protocols and systems are set up through Google Drive. It is a little bit more manual than I would like. There are really great programs out there that you can get to manage your vendor onboarding records. We don't need it yet. Food Connects is at about 4.3 million in sales, and we are doing just fine with Google Forms. I mean, I'm sure if I got into a supply chain program, I'd really love it. But just in terms of where we are, we have it built out in Google Drive and it's working okay. So you can keep that in mind too as you're thinking about building out your program. So first things first is this new vendor Google form. So this is pretty basic info. Name, address. Actually, I'm just going to show you. I'm going to exit out of this screen share for a second and just show you. Can you see this Google form on the screen? Okay, cool. So this is the back end view of it because when I show you the responder view, you're only going to see one section. But again, it's pretty simple. It's your primary contact information. Like if you have a different person for ordering, like who I would be placing the order with, that's information. Best way to contact you, logistics, so your pickup location, what days of the week we pick up from, pickup instructions. What kind of equipment
McKenna,
do you have?
Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you. Can you zoom in a little bit so we can see the some of the
Yes,
questions?
I can. Good question. Thank you for that.
Thanks, McKenna.
Yeah, totally. And I'm going to share this with you all. So you'll have not, not the back end view, but you'll have the responder link and you can look at this. This is totally open for you to use however you want. Um, so this is just basic information that comes in, what equipment you have, um, giving our operations team information about what's there, picking up from your location, and then billing information. Um, The information that comes out of this Google form is used in a couple different places in terms of creating the customer in our backend and in terms of like adding information into our logistics programming, things like that into our routing. This is not the first time our team hears about this. General logistics considerations are part of the initial assessment of whether this is a vendor that's going to fit into the operational needs. But this is just where we get way more detailed information, and then it goes into it goes into a Google form where a lot of different people on the team have access to it, and then that information is available. If like, I randomly need to find a contact info, I know I can look here, and there's usually information here if it's not correct in the other places. So again, you'll have more information on this. So we'll go back to slideshow here, get my notes back up, and go back to full screen. Okay, are we back into the slideshow?
Looks good.
Okay, cool. Okay, so new vendor Google form, check. And also I will say there's lots of different ways to get all this information. So I'm just showing you what we've set up, but you should cherry pick and weave and make your own thing that works really well for you and your setup and your tech and your staffing. So next here is insurance requirements. And insurance is all about your liability, right? So, and how that liability does or does not trickle back to the vendor. So this is the insurance requirements that Food Connects now requires for a grower or for a vendor to work through Food Connects. I'm going to show you our vendor, like our whole emails, our whole onboarding system. This is the information that goes out right from the bat. Um, so we do require to be named on the insurance as a COI. And these are the general requirements. It's really just about liability. Insurance shall be placed with insurance companies licensed to do business in the state of Vermont. And then, we just add this as a ask to automatically send us your COI when your insurance policy renews. It doesn't happen most of the time, but that's okay. Um, Insurance is something to think about on an organizational individual, like per your unique needs. You don't need to require this high of liability. Food Connects did not require this high to start. We did have to increase it per some of our requirements when we became fully regulated under FSMA. Some things about our insurance changed, and this was something we had to change with our insurance. And This is so we have a question. Is this product liability insurance or just general liability? This is general liability. Food Connects does also have product liability insurance for the product that we own and handle in inventory, but that's separate from what we require from our vendors. But again, like, look at your organization, talk to your insurance company probably to see how this threads into your operation. If you are a food hub that is doing a lot of freight and it's not product that you own and are selling, this is probably going to be a different equation for you. Um, and so think about that. So this is not the overall insurance that Food Connects, the food hub, has for our operation. This is just what we require for the vendor to onboard. Um, One thing I always share is if your vendor is unsure of how to go about to getting this, I went and you as a food hub, depending on your customers, may have also received this request from a customer. I know we often have to get a COI with a customer named as additional insured, and I just send exactly what they send me to our insurance company, and I say, hey, I need a COI that matches this. So I always encourage people to just, that's why I put this so specifically into our onboarding requirements, so someone can just send that specifically to their insurance company and ask for a COI that matches that. Okay, next on the list, W-9, bookkeeping. This is This is a bookkeeping thing. This is not necessarily related to food safety at all, but it's just something that we include in our onboarding requirement. Often it's required if you're paying someone over $600 annually, basic, basic W-9. Depending on how stuff is set up with your bookkeeper, maybe you need this, maybe you don't, I would ask. Next is your organic certification and product list. Sorry, give me a sec. So if you are selling certified organic product or you're processing a certified organic product, you are required to have these records in on file. If you are a distribution food hub and you're selling organic inspected, organic certified product to the end customer, the customer is supposed to be able to reach out to you and get a certificate. They don't have to go to the end. They don't have to go all the way back to the food grower. They're supposed to be able to get it one step back. So if you're selling certified organic product, you need to have that organic certification on file and the product list. And actually, our next training that we have scheduled on March 3rd is all about Food Hub organic compliance and certification. So I'm not going to go too much further onto this, but just know if you're selling anything certified organic, you should have these on file. And we'll talk a lot more about certified organic certification in our next training. Proof of regulated third-party claims. So is the vendor making other third-party claims that require a certificate or are regulated, and are you advertising it? So, there's a lot of stuff out there that's unregulated, and it also is like, does that matter to your operation? Does it not? Are you advertising it? Are you not? Is it like an attribute that's listed? If you're using a front end sales platform, sometimes you can put different attributes on there. So this is just something that we keep on file if it's a regulated third party claim. And some examples that we have from vendors that we work with are listed below here. There's others out there. There's a lot of different types of claims out there, and it's really up to you if it's something that you want to keep a certification of on file. And these we do update every year because often a certification has a 1 year expiration. Okay. So we're going to talk, okay, so vendor attestations. This is a really important thing, and it threads into your food safety verification step. So I'm going to talk about attestations first. So a vendor attestation, and it can and is called different things out there by different organizations and different people doing this, but we call it a vendor attestation, and it's basically the vendor is attesting that they're doing certain things, and they're signing this form that says they're doing it. It is also a really great place to put in specific customer language. You might have a customer who's requiring like some random thing, and the attestation's a really easy place to slide in that language. Um, I'm going to show you the attestations that we've set up. So we have three different buckets of attestations. We have one that's just our general vendor attestation. It's used for all vendors. We have one attestation that is used for all of our organic certified vendors. And then we have one that is specific for meat vendors. And the meat vendor one exists because meat's, like a different framework. And we had some really specific vendor requirements for all of our meat excuse me, we had some very specific customer requirements surrounding our meat vendors. So we created a separate attestation and we put that language in. So I'm going to show you each of these attestations. Let me just open them all up in a row. And you'll have all these templates. These are out there for you to use, these attestation templates. Okay, so here is the general one. Can you see that okay on the screen? Yeah, thumbs up. Okay, thanks. So pretty simple language here. And I wrote this myself. You can totally use this exactly as is, and you can totally cherry pick what works for you. You could totally do your own thing or any mixture of all of that, right? So basically it just says, yeah, like this document certifies that the product sold to the food from vendor name. So when I do this, all the things that are highlighted in yellow, I replace with the vendor name. Um, yeah, thanks, Alicia. You're gonna have a lot of good templates out of this one. Um, Safe for human consumption, free from adulterated or unlabeled additives, in compliance with defect levels. This is all really technical. This is technical language from FSMA, actually, and a lot of the FSMA requirements. So please initial in each box. So these are very specific things we wanted to pull out and have the vendor initial. We reviewed the Food Connect's vendor handbook, which I'm going to show you next. Very first thing, did you review the handbook? Yes, I did. Couple questions in here about maintaining compliance with applicable state, federal, municipal regulations. Quite a few things about FSMA, really drilling in FSMA because FSMA, again, is where a lot of the supply chain requirements come from. Um, we've got labeling laws noted, plus allergens. We talk about recalls a little bit. So we, in our early days, Food Connects did require that all vendors had a recall plan in order to work with us. Um, I did some really assessment of the regulations. It's not technically our responsibility that they have a recall plan, but I wish everyone did, and it's really, really, really important. So we just put this language in here that, regardless of regulatory status, it's strongly recommended to retain a recall plan and conduct annual mock recalls. What happens if there is a recall? What happens if there's a significant food safety issue? Updating food safety documentation, and then Food Connects is not responsible for that vendor's regulatory compliance policies or record keeping. Okay, so that is our standard vendor attestation for all general vendors. And then we just have a little extra section down here at the end. We didn't have a vendor handbook for a really long time. I think we rolled that out like 2 years ago now. And before we had a full-on vendor handbook, we had a lot of stuff here at the bottom of our attestation, and it worked great. So that is a good step for you. If you don't have the capacity right now to write this whole vendor handbook, start adding things in at the bottom of your attestation. And like this can be specific, like this is going to be specific to issues you've noticed. Like what keeps coming up with your vendors, what are issues, and then you add that to this attestation. This also helps with your liability because if, something keeps happening with a vendor, you now have this record that says, hey, like you signed this thing. It was very clear that you agreed to this and this thing keeps happening. And it's like, depending on what the issue is, you're not going to necessarily like cut them out of your program on their first issue. But if it's something that keeps happening over and over and over again, you do have proof that they agreed to abide by some certain standards and agreements. So we had a lot of issues with packaging in the very beginning. So you'll see that's reflective in what we added to our vendor attestation. And then, we still do sometimes. So we just decided to keep it in the attestation. So it's in the attestation, and this is also very thoroughly written out in our vendor handbook. And then signature and name. And this is something that is done annually. So as part of our, like annual maintenance of our compliance program, we do have an annual system where it's pretty manual. Again, the supply chain is one of our more manual systems we have in place, but where this stuff gets resent out to all our vendors every single year. They're re-signing attestations. We update the handbook. We're getting updated COIs, things like that. And we're actually in the middle of that right now. It's part of our winter flow of stuff we have to get done. Okay, so next thing here is the organic attestation. So it is all the same stuff that you just saw in the general one. Plus, we have a section for organic requirements. And again, we're going to talk a lot more specifics about organics in our next training. Most of what's in here in this organic section is specifically out of the organic regulations, and that's stuff that we wanted to have the vendors attest to as well. So you'll get this back, and then same thing down here, just those additionally highlighted agreements that we need for product coming in. And then the meat is, like I said, its own attestation, and that is, it's different regulations, USDA law, for the most part. But we had some really specific customer requirements, like I noted, specifically these two ones. We had to verify that vendors were aware of this and had this for all of our meat products. So we added it to the meat vendor attestation, and it worked out great. And all of our meat related vendors get this specific attestation. And then all the rest of the same stuff. Okay. Back to this. So the next thing is where it gets really technical with food safety verification. And this is where your FSMA status really comes into play. So you have the attestation, right? You're saying, hey, vendor, you're responsible for having all these things in place. Depending on your FSMA status, you may have to verify that, right? So it's like you're saying you have it. For some people, that's enough. Or not some people, but just for some regulatory frameworks, that's enough. Some of the more regulated, and then also it's not just FSMA, if you're a bigger hub and you need to be verifying stuff, if you have customers that require a verification step, that's where some of this food safety verification comes into play. So you are verifying what the vendor actually has. Is that tracking for you? Give me a thumbs up if that's tracking for you. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Okay. There's a lot of different ways to verify a supply chain. You can be doing site visits, you can be requiring an internal audit, you can be talking to each vendor, you can have the vendors come in and show you stuff. What we do and what I see a lot of is just reviewing food safety documentation and food safety plans. So we say, okay, cool, like Food Connects is fully regulated under FSMA. We fully need to comply with the verification. And also we're third party audited. Like I mentioned, it was a huge part of our audit. She went down into the weeds on all of our records and was like looking through stuff. And so, yeah, so we do have to have a pretty robust verification step. Food Connects does not have the capacity to do site visits to every single vendor we want to work with. I know some food hubs do a lot more technical assistance with your food vendors and are a lot more involved on that side of things. So you might be doing this already if you're working really closely with your vendors on their system development and supply chain programming. So just think about that in response to your needs. But again, what Food Connects does is we require documentation, which can be a third-party audit. That works great. Or we require proof of food safety systems. And those requirements are different depending on what type of vendor it is. So Food Connects has a very broad catalog, right? We have dairy, eggs, meat, fish, a ton of value added stuff in addition to produce and raw agricultural commodities. So those are, and so it does get kind of technical of needing to know what those types of vendors are supposed to have so you can verify what they say they're doing in their attestation. And I'm going to show you what we require for those kinds of things. And you'll notice that it says proof of food safety systems. So I try to keep it really flexible on what that can mean, because we are really committed to helping small and medium-sized vendors access wholesale markets. So we don't have a hard line of needing a third-party audit. I don't have a hard line of needing a HACCP plan or a full-on food safety plan. I take all sorts of stuff because I can look at things and verify what it means and see that people have these food safety systems in place. And that's really what I'm looking for here. Um, I have turned things down when I can tell that it is a log that, was filled out 5 minutes ago for the last year or, things like that. But it's not a hard, we'll never work with you. It's a, hey, like, we're really interested in you. Here's some resources. Here's some people that can help you get some of these systems in place so that you can provide proof of your food safety systems as part of your onboarding program. Um, Yeah, some things I take for this are, I mean, the robust things are great too. If you have a full-on plan, that's awesome. I'll take some people's employees' handbooks have a really well written out food safety section and employee training section. Some people will send me a table of contents of all their SOPs and logs, and I'll like spot check some things of that. Some people send me pictures of all the logs on different parts of their equipment, things like that. So I really do try to, we do need to verify, like whether you like it or not, like we have to verify that you have this stuff in place. And frankly, like we are on the hook of making sure we're introducing safe food into the supply chain. But I do try to not make it like a super hard line of having these really strict things in place. And you'll see, it'll make sense when I show you what the requirements are for each type of vendor. We do have some larger customers that can only buy from vendors with third-party audits or HACCP plans or things like that. So just because we onboard maybe smaller vendors that don't have a third party audit, our larger customers who require that just won't, we can set it in our system on the back end that those customers can only purchase from vendors that meet their requirements. So we do have a way of making sure that our customers who themselves have stricter requirements in place for their own compliance programs, that they are only purchasing from vendors that meet those requirements. But we don't let that stop us from working with smaller vendors who are totally fine and able and safe to be selling to some of our smaller customers. So we really do try to make it work. And it's extra work for sure. And it's totally worth it. Um, so I'm gonna look, okay, so we're at 3:56. We're doing pretty good for time. Um, So I'm going to breeze through pretty quickly here some of the things that we require that we need to verify and look at if the vendor does not, if the vendor does not have a third party audit. Um, so this is stuff that I devised. You might look at this and see something different. Maybe your regulations are different, things like that. So keep that in mind. But for fresh produce and fruit, so proof of a food safety plan or equivalent documentation and water test results for pre and post. If you're a meat vendor, we require a USDA inspection number. So I know there's some different things with like in-state processing and stuff like that. We do require a USDA inspection stamp and number to sell through our food hub. That might be different for your hub. And then for meat, there's a couple different levels, like if the product comes right to us from the processing facility versus if it's held in an intermediate location versus if it's further processed. And you're going to have access to all this information. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Value added in dairy, same things for both of these sections, but proof of food safety plan or equivalent documentation. We look at that the place has a state food processing license and permit, and then we look at the most recent facility inspection. Fish, we require proof of a HACCP plan. Fish is high risk, like we need to see a HACCP plan for fish if it's been processed. And then some of these other things, processing license and facility inspection. And then we do have a step for buying from other food hubs and distributors, which we do a lot of. We work with a lot of other hubs and a lot of other distributors. And for the supply chain part of that, if the hub or distributor has an equivalent onboarding program to us, then we don't need to get anything additional. We just can onboard the hub or distributor. If that hub, maybe that hub doesn't have a verification step in their onboarding program and they don't have some of this food safety documentation on file, because of their FSMA status, we will just go direct. We'll ask the vendor for the food safety requirements. Okay, and so the next part of this is the vendor handbook. So if you remember, the first line in the attestation says basically, yes, we reviewed the handbook and we agreed to the handbook. And so this is our vendor handbook, and I'm going to send this out to you as well. Yeah, we just rolled this out like 2 years ago, but it's dynamic. We're updating it all the time. This is also available on our website. So if you're a vendor who's interested in working with us, they can go and see the handbook right off and there's a lot of information in here about expectations. Let's see. So yeah, who our team is, what our schedule is like, um, a little bit of information about our different types of product categories, purchase orders. It's kind of a one-stop shop of all the things that over the years we were answering lots of questions on that we finally threaded into one document, and we were very happy to have this all in one place. So different information about purchase orders, general vendor and requirements, billing and payment, product information and listings, order issues. Yeah, all sorts of stuff. And again, you're going to have this to look at. Um, Quality, fresh produce quality protocols, packaging, a lot about packaging, shipping labels. We've got a little bit of compliance and food safety in here, but we don't have a ton of it in our vendor handbook because it's all part of the onboarding process. Our team does a lot with promos and demos and sales support and marketing support. So that's a pretty good section in here. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at this, but just know that you will have this and you can take it, edit it, use it. It's been very, very helpful to have a one-stop shop with all this information. And we do also have a customer-facing handbook that basically, mirrors the expectations and information for the customers as well. And I can share that if people are interested in that. That's also available publicly on our website. Okay, back to our handy PowerPoint. Go back to full screen. So there's a lot of threads to consider here. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, just let it dissipate, let it go, because it is something you can put together. We're going to look at some systems right now of how to support it. And I do think at a most basic level, without knowing anything about FSMA statuses, the things I recommend, insurance, W-9, and a vendor attestation, I think are three important things to have in place, that, take major, oh, did I just put my hand up? Whoops. That majorly help with your liability and your risk, and are things that you can set up. Right, getting your vendor attestation out there is like, of course, it's work to send it out and talk to your vendors and have them do it, but it's a good medium step if you're not ready to take a full-on verification step for getting food safety documentation. But just know, like, an attestation is not verification. So you are not, like, you're getting this thing signed. I don't know that it's like not technically a legal document. Um, but so you're not verifying that they actually have a supply chain program just by doing the attestation. And that is a decision for you to make with your hub, but it is a really good, important step to take in terms of just getting some stuff out there, having them sign something as part of onboarding and stuff like that. And then of course, if you're selling organic certified, then adding in organic records as part of your onboarding is really important too. So those are the basic things I recommend considering right off the bat if you're not doing these things already. And then what I want to look at next here is some systems. So if you're going to engage in the journey of building out your vendor onboarding program, be strategic and think about how you're going to set that system up ahead of time, and because it's a lot of records to maintain. And you don't want to do all this work and then have stuff all over the place and not be able to actually access the information, right? Like I said, there's a lot of different ways to set this up, and it totally depends on your staffing and what your backend systems look like. If you are using a some sort of third party uh, ERP, or, which is an enterprise resource platform. Basically, a fancy way of saying, like, do you have a computer program system, something like that, that you're using to facilitate sales and hold information? So I'm going to show you how Food Connects has done it, but just know it's like endless the ways you could set this up for yourself. Okay, so to do this, I'm just going to exit out of this quickly, and I'm going to pull up this. Can you see this new, it looks like an inbox here. Do I need to, oh, you can, okay, cool. Thanks, Helen. Okay, so this is our compliance specific email address. And I'm just gonna, so our compliance specific email account. You can see there's a lot of emails in here. We're doing, like I mentioned, we're doing our annual vendor onboarding right now. So we have please respond, annual records renewal. We've been doing this for years. Our vendors are used to it by now. But it's still, it's definitely something we plan for through February through March to do it. Um, One kind of off topic note is if your organization does not have department specific email accounts, like if you're doing everything from your own, like if I was sending this from McKenna instead of from compliance or operations or sales, that's a good consideration for your organization to create some shared email accounts and get things out of personal email accounts and get it into a department specific email account. It is so helpful when your staffing changes, or maybe you have two people on your sales team or three people on your ops team, stuff like that. And even if you don't, even if it's just one or two people or three people doing everything, still think about separating your personal communications out of your food hub operational sales communications, things like that. So we have a compliance specific email. So if I was going to start and I was like, okay, I'm going to send an onboarding request. This vendor has been vetted. They're ready for onboarding. Let's send them the onboarding request. So again, like I said, we do everything through Google and Google Docs. So we've got this. I would send them a template. So I have all these emailing templates set up as templates in Google. So I'm going to say, okay, this is a organic produce vendor. So I'm going to go to this template and I'm going to click that, and it's going to automatically populate with what I need to send them. So this is all the stuff that we just talked about, right? We've got the new vendor form. We've got the insurance, PDF for the W-9, the vendor attestation, organic certification, third-party claims, and food safety documentation. So it's everything we just talked about all lined up for us. If I was going to onboard a value added vendor, I have a template for that too. So dairy, value added, organic. So same thing. And you can see that the food safety options are a little bit different, specific to a value add or dairy vendor. And then I do have all the oh, the bookmarks bar is not showing. Um, so I have the bookmarks bar here, and I have all these things bookmarked that I might need. So this is an organic vendor. I'm going to open up the vendor attestation. I will create a copy of it, I'll fill it out, and I will attach it to this email address along with the vendor handbook. And then that's all sent out. So like I said, taking the time to set some of this stuff up is going to save you a lot of time over time. And help you from not making mistakes, frankly, too, if you're not, like retyping this every single time you're onboarding somebody. So that's the initial push. That's the initial request for onboarding documentation. And then I'm going to show you our logs and how we keep that organized on the back end. And I made a blank, I can't show you our whole like back end on vendor log. So I made a training version that just has like made, no names for some of this and cleaned it up a little bit. So you'll see, is the Zoom okay on this, Alicia? Good enough?
It's a little small print, yeah.
Okay, this will also be shared with you, this blank training one. And then let me see if I can zoom in a little bit while we look at it. Okay, so you'll see here at the bottom, so this is our vendor onboarding log. We've got a different section for dairy, eggs, meat, produce, value-added seafood, and then for freight. Um, And yeah, so I just got it set up. All the things that we talked about, this spreadsheet is set up. I encourage you to make, if this is something you want to use, make a copy of it and start using it and edit it to fit your needs. Um, so where are we? We're in dairy right now. So say this dairy person has an SQF audit. They don't need these other food safety requirements. This person does not have a third party audit. So therefore, they need these other requirements. And so we just really keep track of it this way in this log. What I want to show you now is, so we have organic all in yellow, keeps it nice and clean of knowing who's organic and who's not. If we're onboarding a new vendor, like say I just sent that vendor that onboarding request email out to somebody, I add them into the pending section right here. So each of these is hyperlinks to a vendor folder. And I think I have some examples here in the produce one. Yeah, so in the produce tab, I've got some examples. And I'll just delete some of these. You don't need all of these. So we've got some of our organic vendors and we've got some of our non-organic vendors. And what we did is we set up, so every vendor that we work with has their own vendor folder. And then I'm going to just go into the training one here. But so every single vendor that we work with has a vendor folder. And it's created when we send that onboarding request out. So I've got some set up here for trading that we can look at. So these are not, so Harlow Farm is one of our active vendors. I'm going to show you their folder. They're one of our baseline partners. Worked with them for a really long time. And by having just one folder, you'll see everything we've ever done with this vendor lives in this folder. So it's like where we would put photos, pricing, meeting notes, sales reports, stuff like that. We used to be, Food Connect started working out of Harlow Farms cooler. So some of our old lease stuff is in here. So it's just like, this has been a system we've used from a really long time, even before we were using having an onboarding system the way we do, but we always had active vendor folders. And then within each folder, so Mountain View Farm, that's just a name I made up, but you can also see it in Harlow Farm here. They have an onboarding documents folder within their folder, right? So back to this, so Mountain View Farm. So I made an onboarding docs folder inside of Mountain View Farm. And that is what this links to. So when I create this and it's pending, I create their folder and I link to it right off the bat. And that way it's all in one place and it goes right to their onboarding docs folder for the onboarding log. And again, it's just like setting these steps up so that over the course of their onboarding, I can just so quickly go right to their onboarding folder as I'm working in this log and having their documents coming in. And I think that's all I have to say about that. I'm gonna send you this training log that doesn't have any vendor names on it so you can see. But a lot of these won't be read anymore once we're, like I said, we're in the midst of our onboarding. We don't have the capacity to keep up with this in real time for every single vendor, which is why we do it annually. So there are some places that have capacity to like immediately know when something's outdate, when something's coming up for expiration. And we, like there is stuff that we do that with, but some of the things, like that's part of if we miss it throughout the course of the year, then we have this annual step where we make sure everything gets updated and re-verified as part of our systems and part of our audit prep and just really part of our supply chain verification steps. It's again, it is an important step to make sure the supply chain that you're working with is safe and verified. So I showed the email, I showed the templates. I think that's good for this. And then we'll go back to our PowerPoint and we're doing pretty good on time here. Um, So I showed the system and then, okay, so now what? So first of all, don't panic, right? I know this is a lot of information, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of templates, a lot of things to think about. But the first step is to just like step back and just assess things for your operation. So what variables do you need to consider? What threads play into your needs and your operation and your regulatory compliance? What do you already have in place? Um, it's quite off common people have more in place than they give themselves credit for. So look at that. Look at things through that lens and then look at what existing systems you have for organizing and setting this up. Um, like I said, we had active vendor folders right from the start. So I didn't rebuild all of that. I did update it and then built our log to match those folders. So again, like just assess your current operation and your current systems, and maybe you can cherry pick and build off of it. Maybe you're going to have to build something fresh. Either way, like it's good information to have. And then the timing of this is pretty important. So vendor onboarding is an off-season winter project. It is very difficult to roll out a vendor onboarding program in August. Um, you won't like it, and your vendors won't like it. So this is actually a really good time to be having this training and for you to be thinking about this program because this is a really good time to initiate the conversation around vendor onboarding with any of your food producers. Um, this system is easier to do from the start, I will say. It is hard. It can be more work to retroactively onboard your vendors. We had to do it though, and a lot of people do because supply chain is not something I think people do right from the start, um, ourselves included. So what we did is we set a date and we said, okay, any vendor onboarding starting today, starting at this date, moving forward, has to be onboarded per the new system. And then we're gonna retroactively onboard all of our current vendors over the next year. It's and it can take a long time. You're gonna have people right away be totally fine with it and send you what you need. You might have vendors who maybe don't have everything that you're requiring, and that's something you're gonna work with them on. And sometimes people are a little resistant, so you have to work with educating your vendors around why you're requiring this stuff and how it actually helps them and how you can support them. And then I'd say be really honest with yourself that it's going to take a while. So if you think you're going to be fully regulated under FSMA in a year or two from now, if you are targeting going for a third party audit anytime in the next horizon, 2 years to 3 or 5 years, like start this process now because it can, depending on how many vendors you work with, it's going to take a little while to retroactively onboard people you're already working with. And that's just part of the reality of this. The reality of being a food hub operator and managing the implementation of this system. It's just, yeah, like it took us almost 2 years to retroactively get everyone onboarded. And then again, it's really important to educate your vendors on why you're doing this. And there's a lot of different approaches to this. We had a third party audit and we were becoming fully regulated under FSMA. So we were just like, hey, we have to do this. Here's why. And you can use there's a lot of carrots in there. You can access larger customers. We have customers really interested in your product. We really want to help you access these markets. Da, 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 da. So like helping them understand why this is important is going to bring your vendors along with you as you start to require more paperwork. And if you keep it going, if you keep it systematized, if you're as organized as possible as the system, it's going to be easier for your vendors too. That's why part of why I recommend making sure you have a good system set up in place to support your records and things like that, so that, vendors aren't sending your stuff that are getting lost in different people's personal email accounts and you're re-asking them for things and stuff like that. Like make it as clean and simple as possible for your vendors. Because it already is, an extra ask for them on top of everything else that they're doing. Um, I think that's my last slide.